What's up, guys? Welcome to Fed by Fire. I'm Christian Whitlow, and tonight we're taking a look at something I have a deep interest in: train theft, something that has always intrigued me. And this is how a few Amazon package taken off a train can turn into a federal felony. But before we kick off, this is for entertainment and educational purposes only. People, that rob trains, they risk prison or even worse, death. So, let's get into it. Train robbery didn't die with the frontier. It evolved, shaping the American immigration in ways that still echoes today. So in the mid to late 1800s, the railroad became the backbone of a rapidly expanding nation. Steel tracks snaked across deserts, plains, and mountains, carrying payroll, gold, supplies, and passengers. Anything you could imagine. These trains represented a centralized wealth moving predictably across the country, and where there was money on rails, there were people willing to take it. And among the earliest and most notorious of these criminals was Jesse James and his gang. They saw trains not as mere machines, but as moving fortresses of opportunity. They became masters of timing, understanding train schedules, telegraph communications, and the geography of the surrounding terrain. Each heist was carefully calculated to stop a train. The gang would often ambush it at a curve or in a remote stretch of track, using the neutral landscape as a cover. Horses provided the mobility, allowing the gang to strike quickly and escape into the wilderness before authorities could even respond. But James was not alone. Butch Cassidy and his Wild Bunch perfected similar techniques in the American Southwest, combining audacity with cunning. Their targets ranged from payroll safes to gold shipments to mail, sometimes involving, strategic connected rail systems. And these outlaws understood that hitting a train was not just about brute force. It required precision, timing, and careful observation of railroad operations. A single misstep could lead to capture, and yet the payoff was worth the risk. Thousands of dollars in cash or precious metals in a single raid, equivalent to hundreds of thousands of dollars in today's money. Railroad design in this period made trains both vulnerable and predictable. Cars were interconnected with mechanical couplings, often locked with simple chains or padlocks. Guard presence was inconsistent. Some shipments had armed escorts, but it was rare. But payroll trains or gold transports often moved lightly, protected, especially through rural or sparsely populated areas. Telegraph lines offered a rudimentary method of communication, allowing stations to send warnings if a train was delayed, but information traveled slowly, and outlaws exploited these gaps. They also relied on insider tips. Station clerks, depot employees, and even railroad workers could provide valuable intelligence about which cars carried money, when shipments would depart, and the composition of the train. The stories of these heists are legendary because of the stakes involved and the audacity displayed. For instance, the James gang would swing abroad moving trains, pry open safes, and leap off with sacks of gold, sometimes while shots rang out in the desert air. Each robbery created tension, urgency, and drama, but also demonstrated careful preparation. Outlaws studied the schedules, like we talked about, the terrain and the personal routines, turning all this into logistical exercise. Success required not only courage, but knowledge of the system itself. By the late 1800s, train robberies had become widespread. Newspaper accounts, chronicled these events, adding to their notoriety while law enforcement struggled to adapt. Early railroad police forces were small, often underfunded, and spread very thin across long stretches of track. Sheriff departments and marshals occasionally pursued gangs, but capture rates were low. The combination of geography, technology, and cunning outlaws created a pattern of crime that fascinated the public. People romanticized the figures who struck trains as symbols of rebellion against centralized power, even as their actions had real economic and personal consequences. As the century turned, train robberies began to evolve alongside railroads themselves. Freight diversified beyond cash and gold to manufactured goods, from food to textiles and eventually automobiles. Trains moved faster, ran longer distances, and began carrying goods of greater volume and variety. Outlaws adapted. Solo mass robbers were gradually replaced by organized groups, often relying on intelligence and careful observation rather than the direct confrontation. Tools shifted from firearms and crowbars to methods exploiting mechanical vulnerabilities, prying locks, disconnecting couplings, and later exploiting electrical and signal systems. So, by the early 20th century, law enforcement had professionalized railroad police departments. And those departments were established to protect cargo and personnel. Insurance companies began underwriting freight, creating financial incentives to prevent theft. Yet, despite increased security, the underlying dynamic remained. Whatever valuable goods moved predictably, criminals sought opportunity, and trains were fast, efficient, and relatively lightly monitored along their routes and gaps. So, in communication and oversight remained exploitable. These historical patterns set the stage for the modern era of train theft. The romanticized Wild West robberies evolved into industrial-scale operations, with modern thieves targeting not gold or cash but electronics, vehicles, tires, and high-demand consumer goods. The methods, while less violent than revolver-wielding outlaws, are equally calculated. Just as James and Cassidy studied the train schedules and terrain, modern crews study the shipping codes, container markings, and the movement of goods from port to rail yards. Insider information, whether from employees, warehouses, or digital tracking, is often key to identifying valuable cargo. In 2024, the U.S. saw more than 65,000 cargo thefts from trains, a 40% increase from the prior year. Losses range from $15 billion to $35 billion annually, demonstrating the scale of modern freight theft. So, modern thieves rely on tools such as bolt cutters, battery-powered saws, and vehicles staged for rapid pickup. Remote areas across California, Arizona, Texas, and New Mexico are the hot spots for these operations, where trains can be forced to stop without the crew noticing. In some cases, thieves cut air brake hoses to trigger emergency stops, unload targeted containers, and escape with trucks waiting nearby, all within minutes. Each heist is meticulously planned, and some crews focus on specific cargo, so limited release speakers, auto parts, tires, or high-demand electronics. These items are often immediately sold online or distributed through underground markets. Insider knowledge is invaluable, whether from port or warehouse staff, shipping records, or digital tracking systems, every operation demonstrates the same principles the Wild West outlaws followed: intelligence, timing, and the ability to exploit predictable systems. The first major modern example is the Northern Arizona Nike heist. On January 13, 2025, near Williams, 11 individuals cut the brake line of a BNSF railway train. The targeted container held 1,984 Nike sneakers worth over $440,000. The thieves had trucks and SUVs staged to pick up the merchandise, completing the theft before the engineer realized anything had even happened. Federal investigators named a man named No Castro as the lead defendant, and indictments were issued for all 11. Several co-defendants faced additional immigration-related charges, but the heist demonstrated that modern train thefts are not about confrontation, but timing, logistics, and knowledge of the shipping network. In the high desert of Southern California became the stage for one of the largest modern train burglary operations in recent years. Over several weeks in late 2025, freight trains rolling through San Bernardino County were systematically targeted, and the scale of the theft was staggering. Unlike the Northern Arizona case, which involved a single well-coordinated strike, this operation unfolded across multiple locations, revealing a sprawling criminal network with homes and storage units used as staging grounds for stolen goods. So on October 1st, deputies from the San Bernardino County Sheriff's Office Rural Crimes Task Force executed 3 simultaneous search warrants. The first was at a home on the 8800 block of Maple Avenue in Hesperia. Inside, investigators discovered numerous items stolen from the recent train burglaries, along with $9,200 in cash. The stolen merchandise, when appraised by BNSF railway investigators, totaled at $54,442. 11 suspects were taken into custody and booked on felony charges for possession of stolen property and conspiracy to commit a crime. Meanwhile, at the 1400 block of Anascapa Road, deputies uncovered a larger trove. Nearly $42,000 in U.S. currency was seized, alongside $133,867 in stolen property, including electronics, packaged consumer goods, and other freight items. Investigators also confiscated 8 illegal firearms, comprising of 4 rifles and 4 pistols, suggesting the network was prepared to defend its operation if confronted. 6 additional suspects were arrested. So here again, booked on possession and conspiracy charges. The third location was a storage unit on Palmdale Road in Victorville. Here, railroad police recovered $188,309 worth of stolen merchandise. Cash totaling $61,200 was seized, bringing the cumulative value across 3 sites to over $300,000. Law enforcement described the operation as organized and methodical, with homes and storage facilities acting as temporary warehouses for stolen goods before distribution could happen. Yet, even as investigators were consolidating these arrests, the operation was not complete. On October 6th, authorities served an additional warrant at a residence on the 14600 block of Willow Street in Hesperia, connected to the earlier burglaries. As deputies approached, 7 suspects attempted to flee the property, prompting a rapid response by the Sheriff's Aviation Unit. All 7 were apprehended and returned to the scene. Inside the home, 7 more individuals were detained, bringing the total arrests from this single location to 14. So these suspects were also booked at the High Desert Detention Center. The logistics of these burglaries illustrate the modern sophistication of train theft operations, and these were not random acts of opportunity. Investigators found evidence that suspects had been trafficking train schedules, identifying high-value cars, and coordinating multiple pickup points to move stolen goods efficiently. Vehicles were staged near the tracks for quick loading, and storage units functioned as temporary hubs to conceal and distribute the merchandise. Cash flow suggests that these crews were monetizing their haul rapidly, likely through underground resale channels and digital marketplaces. But this spree highlights several characteristics of contemporary train theft. First, the targets are precise rather than indiscriminately looting. Crews focus on goods with immediate resale value. Second, security vulnerabilities remain a critical factor. Freight trains operate with fewer crew members, longer routes, and less surveillance in rural areas. Third, these operations often intersect with other crimes like illegal firearms, money laundering, and organized distribution networks are common. The scale and the audacity of the San Bernardino County operation draws a direct line from the calculated strategies of the Wild West outlaws to the modern era. Just as Jesse James studied telegraph patterns and train schedules, these crews relied on detailed observation, timing, and coordination. The difference is in the tools: bolt cutters, modern locks, vehicles, and digital knowledge replace horses, revolvers, and crude mechanical devices, but the principle remains the same. So, understand the system, identify the vulnerable points, and execute efficiently. That's their motto. The aftermath of these arrests is significant. Nearly $380,000 in stolen property and cash was recovered, but investigators emphasized that the operation was likely part of a broader network, that additional stolen goods may have already entered secondary markets, and the inclusion of firearms in the recovered assets underscores the potential for violence, highlighting that while these modern thieves often avoid guns during the actual theft, they are prepared to defend their operations and their products. The San Bernardino County case also reveals the human element. 31 individuals across multiple sites, coordinating their movements and evading capture for weeks. Law enforcement faced, the challenge of connecting multiple crime scenes, tracking suspect movement, and executing synchronized warrants. It is a modern illustration of the ongoing cat and mouse dynamic between cargo thieves and authorities, where planning, intelligence, and rapid response determine success. On both sides, in early to mid-June 2025 in Los Angeles became the backdrop for a theft that carried stakes far beyond stolen merchandise. Hundreds of firearms and gun parts just vanished from Union Pacific Railroad. Freight trains moving through the city, unlike, sneakers or electronics, these items pose as an immediate threat to public safety, and the moment they disappeared, law enforcement quickly recognized that each stolen weapon could surface anywhere. And neighborhoods, criminal networks, or underground markets, the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms and Explosives acted swiftly on this. The ATF Special Agent in charge, Kenny R. Cooper of the Los Angeles Field Division, issued a warning that stealing firearms endangers every community, and these weapons, travel through agency partnered with the National Shooting Sports Foundation. But, they were stating the obvious there. There's a $10,000 reward on that case, though, for tips leading to their arrest and conviction of those responsible. But investigators urge the public to provide as many details as possible about the suspects, their movements, and potential hideouts. Tips could be submitted via the ATF tip line, but y'all can find that yourself. But there's $10,000 on the line there. Might be something to look into. So, guys, we have looked at tonight how, the train robbing thing has never stopped. And the culprits of the last one remained at large. In law enforcement, they have emphasized that the stolen firearms entering the black market are a hidden but constant threat. In the operation, it illustrated a key difference between traditional cargo theft and modern criminal impact. The consequences are not just economic, but potentially lethal. And unlike stolen sneakers or electronics, firearms can rapidly change hands and be used in violent crimes, obviously increasing the urgency of recovery for these items. What makes this case particularly alarming is just the combination of scale and uncertainty. Hundreds of weapons were taken in a brief window of time, and with the suspects unknown, they got away with it. So there was no immediate way to track the flow of these stolen firearms, and investigators feared that the items could move across state lines quickly or be stored in private residences, creating a network of potential risk that could take months or even years to unravel. Each day, the weapons remain in circulation is a little increased danger to communities, but the Los Angeles theft serves as a stark reminder that modern train crime has evolved into a multi-dimensional threat, and the focus is no longer solely on profit, but also on goods with, social impact, including firearms and other regulated items. Coordinated efforts between federal agencies and local law enforcement and industry partners are now essential to their success to disrupting these operations and recovering the stolen property. Train theft is not just a crime of opportunity, it is calculated disruption of a national supply chain. In 2024, the U.S. recorded over 65,000 cargo thefts, like we said earlier. But guys, that's all for this one. We saw how train theft has evolved. I will have a couple more episodes this weekend. Thank you guys for watching. I'll catch you on the next one.